Right. Well, good morning. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Amy Foers, and I'm a consultant with the Jackson Collaborative Network. I'm joined by Sarah, and you want to do a quick introduction?
Yes. Hello, good morning. I'm Sarah Williams, and I am also a collaborative network consultant at the Jackson Collaborative Network. Amy and I do this work together.
And we are actually joined by Sherry Butters this morning. Sherry, you want to do a quick introduction?
Hi, everybody. I think I know most of you, but I haven't met everyone. So Sherry Butters, I'm the manager with the Jackson Collaborative Network. And so I work closely with Amy and Sarah, supporting the infrastructure of the network. And Harry, I have not seen you in a couple of years, so it's nice to see you.
And actually, if we want to just go through, just a quick housekeeping note, if you signed on under an email that you don't typically get, you don't want emails coming from our organization, feel free to put that in the chat. But if you use your regular one, we'll have access to that. And then if you want to do quick introductions, we'll go through and just introduce yourself and the organization that you're with, or if you're a community member, feel free to introduce yourself as that, and we'll get started.
Well, good morning. My name is Marcus Gill. I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at the Jackson County ISD.
Morning, Marcus.
Thank you for having me.
Glad you're with us.
Hi, I'm Dana Ashlock. I'm the program director at the Jackson Community Foundation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ryan Smith, and I am the Government and Community Relations Manager for the Jackson Area Transportation Authority.
I'm Harry Wilson. Oh, go ahead.
My name is Debbie Hyatt, and I am the Mobility Navigator for the Rides to Wellness program for the Jackson Area Transportation Authority.
Harry Wilson. I'm on the Department of Health and Human Services Board for Jackson County, and also the chair of the Center for United Center for Caring, which also includes Partnership Park.
I'm Stasia Milligan. I am the Chief Program Officer for Family Service and Children's Aid.
Anyone that we missed? Great. Well, thanks all for being here. This is a special edition of our Equitable and Policies and Practices Affinity Group. And some of you may have been in attendance last month where we launched it. And the work we'll talk about today, we'll continue to talk about strategies and how to align them. But because we have a new and exciting opportunity that Sherry is going to lead us through, we thought we would start with kind of some grounding around affinity groups. And many of you are new faces to affinity groups, so that would make sense and hopefully make sense to you all. If it doesn't, please speak up, because we welcome questions and thoughts and wonderings. We've been in the work for a while, so if we say a word that doesn't make sense or doesn't land, please let us know. Raise a hand, wave, do something. Anything else here, Amy?
No, I think that's it. Yeah, we're excited to do a quick introduction. And as Sarah mentioned, this is going to be a little bit different than our typical affinity groups because we're going to be introducing this opportunity. But we'll give you an overview of what it looks like, and we'll move from there.
So this is just kind of to set the stage of the affinity groups and why we have them, and how the network is structured, what Amy and I do. So the affinity groups, we have 3 currently, and they're really designed to build capacity, support conversations. And in this group, it is around the root cause of making policies and practices more equitable, with an emphasis on those experiencing inequitable outcomes. So the purpose of the affinity group is that network partners like yourself are coming together and supporting each other in conversations around this root cause that you all have said you're working on. The group will also focus on how to partner with community members and people with lived experience to better understand deeper root causes and explore strategies and interventions that your organizations can implement to begin to address the issue. So this is a big part of the affinity group, is around the two parts of it around centering authentic engagement and people with lived experience, right, or closest to the problem. And also that the strategies and interventions are what you all are doing in your organizations. So the point of the affinity groups is not to come report out, or, well, unless you would like to report out strategies, but this is really a place to bring the work that you're doing into the group so that we can strengthen strategies, we can work together to build off each other's successes and learnings. But it really is about each individual and the interventions they are working on, you all are working on in your organizations. And then the affinity groups are facilitated by Amy and myself. So we support the activities that you're doing. We help facilitate connections. It's been really exciting as the groups have continued to grow and morph, to see all the connections that are happening in the group. That Amy and I are there, but we are not making the connections, you all are. So it's really exciting, that part. Educate, share resources, and provide technical assistance. So these are just pieces that Amy and I are here to support. We are not driving any work, like any initiatives. We are simply hearing what you have to say. So say, for example, someone is working on a strategy around talking to their board about a thing, but you're stuck on this tool. Amy and I can come in and help with a tool. So or if we can't help, we're like, oh, I know someone else that might be able to help. So the idea really is that we are service facilitators and support people. Anything else, Amy?
No, I think it covers it. Yeah, these type of groups are a little different than what we're used to. Very often we've gone to meetings where we've sat around and discussed community problems and how awful they are and what should be done. And then we'll go back to organization and continue our 9-to-5 job and not really impact change on those problems. So this is really, rather than coming and listening and talking about the problems, it is identifying that deeper issue, that root cause of inequitable practices or policies in your organization and what each individual organization is doing. And we bring those to the table and kind of quantify them and find out if we're moving the needle on some of these deeper root cause issues. So it looks and feels a little different, but it is fantastic, rich conversation, and really getting to system change actions, which we really think is going to have the most impact.
So here, if you are an affinity group participant, which you all are now, you have joined today, we have the goals, right? Like, so these are the things that we hope that that participants attain while attending. So there's a knowledge piece, there's really an empowering piece, because we would love it if people found so much value in these groups and gained knowledge and were empowered to go do this thing and enhance connections, learning from each other, meeting people, strengthening relationships, always building and improving trust, building trusting relationships, both with people with lived experience, to elevate community power, understanding that communities know what matters most to their health and well-being, and also relationships with each other, right? And with us, because we know that relationships are the key to success in every level. And then, of course, we will track and measure progress. And this we work together on what it would mean, right, for you to measure success. Like, what would that look like? And how do you know you will be successful? And as data develops and changes, does that change the way we do things together? So Amy and I like to say we're like thought partners and helping think about questions or thought-provoking things, but really you all are driving this work.
Okay, so this is just kind of a little bit more about what we're trying to accomplish as we move through these affinity groups. We don't want them to really just be a place to come and converse and talk about the issues, as I mentioned earlier. Really, the first step in kind of engaging in the work is potentially creating a partner profile. That is a very simple name, organization, and what you're doing in the community to address these root causes. That's also where you identify what work you're doing around those root causes so that we can gather people around those things. So that's how we developed these affinity groups. We looked at who was doing work and what root causes they were addressing, and those that we felt like we had the most traction around, or people felt like were most important, we created affinity groups and brought folks together around those issues. And then obviously engaging in affinity group discussions, and then moving to action in action planning. So that is creating an action plan with your problem statement and strategies, which, as Sarah mentioned, we can help strengthen some of those strategies so that they can address multiple root causes. And so they are, and then talking about implementation and resources, and as Sarah mentioned earlier, tracking and measuring progress. So action planning is really where you develop your individual organizational or individual action plan on what you're doing to address this root cause. That'll be a big piece kind of moving forward. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then reporting successes and walking through barriers. So that's a big part of this work too. We'll start an action plan, build a strategy, look at implementation. And when we hit barriers or things aren't working as we need, we can bring it back to the group and partner with each other to say, this isn't working. And folks can say, well, we tried this and this might work better. So we also want to celebrate those successes that you're achieving. We want to know what's working well, and is that, moving the needle and helping address that root cause. So that's a big part of it. Any questions before we move forward? Just want to take a minute and pause and see if all of this makes sense. Anything I missed there, Sarah?
Looks good.
Okay. So we want to just give a quick overview. We won't spend too much time on this, but we keep talking about system change and root causes and things like that. And sometimes our language can get jargony. So we really want to look at, when we're working in these affinity groups, programs, while they're very important and necessary to meet immediate needs, I'd like to talk about programs as helping people beat the odds, where system change or system interventions, where we're actually changing those deeper systems, actually change the odds for individuals. So traditionally, our community has done programs, and they're very needed. We have to meet basic needs, but we really want to go back up the river and find out what in our system is causing these problems and the outcomes that we're seeing, and change those deeper level system responses. Knowing that when we change the system, we're less likely to see those outcomes and see those things in our community that people are struggling with. So in all of the work that we're doing in our network, we're really digging deep to find out what's going on, what are our system responses in our healthcare system, our education system, our financial system, the many systems that we all work within. What is going on in that system that is causing these barriers for our community members? And we really believe that with both programs and system change, will increase community outcomes and really make a better community for the people that live in Jackson. Right. So any questions on this? This is kind of just grounding folks and making sure that we're really looking at deeper root cause issues and system change. And with that, I feel like we should have a drum roll. We're going to pass this on to Sherry to talk a little bit about the opportunity that just became available to help support the work we're doing in affinity groups.
Thank you. So I feel like I will be insufficient at meeting the expectation there.
Drum roll and everything.
I know. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm Sherry Butters. I'm with the Jackson Collaborative Network, and I'm excited to join you today to talk about an opportunity we have to do something a little different, try something that's new and might be a little uncomfortable for all of us, because we're going to try and challenge ourselves to think differently, do differently, and see what happens. So it's not only a figure out a process and implement that process. Sorry, I should have started with the funding piece. It's not just about how we get funding to strategies. It's about the process we put in place that actually helps us do that. We want to learn from that. pilot that, learn from that, and see what's valuable to replicate elsewhere. So that's part of the process that we'll be innovating around in this group, if you guys are open to it. And then we also have the opportunity to connect some available funding with partner strategies that are outlined in those action plans that Amy and Sarah mentioned. So yeah, really, this opportunity really emerged in the past week, and we learned more details that led us to this place where we want to talk with an established group in the network about how we want to go about supporting this process. The funding is related to our past state innovation model work that we did over the past several years. It's actually supporting Shire work, if those words mean anything to you, but it's a community health innovation region grant that comes through one of our cohort partners, and we have funding through Henry Ford Allegiance Health that is designed to support this. So let me go ahead and I'll get to the details because I know that's what everybody wants to hear about. So we're going to have plenty of time to pause for questions, and really just spending most of our time today getting really clear on what's on the table and how do we want to proceed. So we won't be rushing through things at all. Okay, so to start with, I always start with what everyone wants to know most about, which is how much money do we have? So we have $70,000, and these dollars, as I mentioned, are related to our Community Health Innovation Region funding, and those funds are available specifically to address the COVID-related inequity. So what that means is not necessarily something that we didn't know about before COVID, but something that was either present or made more present because of all of the pandemic and COVID-related challenges that we've experienced. I don't think there's any one of us on this call who hasn't identified something related to COVID that is leading to inequities for those we serve. So it's a big, broad bucket. The project funding that's available has to be spent between October of this year, so right now, through September of next year. So the timing is short. And if you haven't guessed already, the planning for how we're going to get from where we are now to allocating funding and those recommendations is also very short. So we'll talk about those steps too. One of the big things to keep in mind as we move through our planning is that our funds, these funds that are available, cannot be used to support planning or network level infrastructure, capacity building, no training, staffing, that kind of stuff. So it's not designed to support our backbone operations or bringing people together like we're doing today. It's really designed to go straight to strategies that are addressing those inequities. All right, so we have a tiny bit of time. It's going to be a big sprint between now and December to define what this project will be. And so by project, it could be lots of things. So I'm going to share the what, and you guys get to figure out most of the how. So by project, we mean either this group could define a set of strategies, a strategy. It's really up to the group to figure those things out and develop some recommendations. But one of the things we know will be true is that any funded partners, so any partners that end up having strategies that are funded through this process, they will be required to report and track progress, or track and report progress. So you'll have an action plan and you'll need to keep that action plan up to date and provide updates. So there is a little bit of a reporting element related to that. I'm going to pause there because that's some of the basics. Do we have any questions at this slide on this content yet? Lots more to go, but.
Sherry, this is Harry.
Hi.
So how is it awarded? Is it like a RFP or is it just a great idea that people vote on or at your level?
Really good questions. We're actually, if I can hold on to that question, because I think we're going to cover that in the next two slides, because that's where we have a lot of opportunity to be creative and try some new things. So other questions before we jump in?
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
So some of you may know about our Rides to Wellness program. But our Rides to Wellness program was designed because of COVID, and we've been running for a year. But we find that that is a problem that the community is facing, not just with COVID, but with that. I lost my question. The funding that's available could potentially be used for helping support that program.
That's a good example of something that would potentially be considered. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So this gets a little more to your question, Harry, around the how. So when this opportunity kind of landed in our lap about a week and a half or so ago, our network council actually took some time to think about how might we go about awarding these funds. You know, how do we want to make sure these funds are put to use in our community, and what kind of process do we want to use? And so that group really landed on a recommendation to use one of our affinity groups where partners are already coming together to think about the work that's happening. They're already working to define strategies. They are bringing folks together. They're designed to bring people together to help support that planning, strategy design, and implementation. And on the back end of things, it also helps drive some action and interest and momentum within the affinity groups that will actually help us from a network perspective. So really the recommendation was to turn this over with some basic requirements and constraints related to the funding, but really turn it over to a group that's already doing work in this area, which is this affinity group, and have a group of partners define what that process would look like. So there would be just the basic, what are the funding constraints? And some of those things being, you know, we're going to kind of define it within our affinity groups, which means it would need to be attached to action plans, and certain things would be true, but that this group would define the process of how that funding would get awarded. Some of the things that our council talked about that would be really, really important are things like making sure, sorry, next slide, I'm going to jump ahead. Thank you. So these are some of the things that came up as we talked about what would need to be important about that process. One, that we want to make sure that this group is open to others who may not have engaged yet. We have many folks in our community, both grassroots organizations, established organizations, nonprofits, all sorts of folks who are doing work around COVID-related inequities. They may not be here today, and that's okay. But we want to make sure that we bring them into the conversation and then we involve them in the process. And so Amy and Sarah, toward the end of our meeting, will talk about some dates and things that we want to put in place and how we can all work together to make sure as many voices as possible are part of our planning. But that this group would be open to anyone that's doing work in that area. And then also that we are applying our values of equity and authentic engagement. This is clearly a continuous learning opportunity, and we must make sure that we're embedding equity and authentic engagement throughout all of the process. So two main things need to be thought about as you guys are thinking through what happens from here is we need to be able to provide to the network council evidence in those recommendations that community members with lived experience have been engaged in the design of the process. So whatever process is designed to connect that funding to the strategies, that we've taken time to check in with our community, and that we've taken time to listen to what folks believe is needed. Second is that community member engagement is present, and there's evidence of that in the design of partner strategies. So for example, Deborah, you called out an example of Rides to Wellness. And so one of the things that would need to be true within any strategy that's considered is that there's evidence that the partner organization that has designed that strategy has engaged with those they're serving to understand what problem is trying to be addressed. Is this solution something they have helped co-design? what feedback or input has been gathered, and how have you applied that to the design of your approach. And then finally, I mean, the biggest kind of red letter day, recommendations from this group around what strategies would be funded would need to go to the council for approval by December 21st. So again, that's a quick turnaround to do some really exciting stuff. And also, like I said, a little uncomfortable because it challenges us to think differently. Because we're not envisioning that it's a full-on grant type approach, that we're utilizing our action plans to really look across what partners are already doing. Getting those action plans documented is going to be important. But then as a team, you guys get to support that process and define what it looks like. So I've got one slide that kind of provides a picture of what the process would look like. And I know there's lots of gaps, and it looks like a pretty clean process on this one slide, but there are so many steps in between to be figured out. So I always like timelines. Those of you that know me know that I do this kind of thing many times. Harry, you'll remember, I'm sure. Many of you have seen the timelines, but I like looking at it in a picture because it's easier for me to kind of keep track of, okay, what do we need to do between now and then? So right now, obviously October, we're working to build shared understanding of what this opportunity is and what's required. We're going to need to do a lot of targeted outreach. So if you look at our group today, it's a small group. We don't necessarily represent all of the aspects of our system here in the community, nor do we include a lot of diversity within our the voices that are present today. So it's going to be really important that we pull in and do some targeted outreach to others in the community, because we're not only defining a process, but we're also going to need to implement that process. And through implementation of that process, we're going to need a group of strategies to be looking at rather than just a few.
Sherry, could I
Yeah.
just say too, as we're talking about targeted outreach, I just want to clarify that that means all of us. So Amy and I and Sherry know, we all know different people, right? Like, so doing some targeted outreach, but we're also counting on you all who are at the table, because you know different people and you all know, you know different things that I don't know about what's happening in the community. And so if you know someone who is doing this good work around inequitable policies or doing something around meeting a need from an inequity, right, that has been heightened since COVID, really, we could tie most or all of our work to this inequity piece, right? We could be creative with it, but like, we're also counting on you all to do outreach, because we can't do this equitably or appropriately if we don't have everyone here. And I don't know who everyone is. I like all together, right? We can reach out. I just wanted to really comment on this targeted outreach. Is not just me and Amy sending emails. It's like Marcus knows of someone and Harry knows of someone, and you know, everyone is reaching out so that it's a collaborative effort.
It's a really good point. Yeah, so it's really, you know, November and December is really focused on that design process. You know, how does this group, what process are you going to define to actually connect this funding where it's most needed and will be most impactful? And that is truly up to this group to determine within the scope of the funding constraints, and also keeping that the need to embed equity and authentic engagement in the process. And really the end product for this group is a set of recommendations that would go forth to the council for consideration. And they'll be looking for, you know, how was equity paid attention to? How has community voice been incorporated into that process? How is community voice present in those strategies that are being recommended for funding? And then really from there, December 21st will be kind of the final decision making on those recommendations. And then in January, implementation would begin. And so what that portfolio of projects look like is really up to this group to define. And the process that you want to use to go through to assess what projects or strategies would be funded, again, is up to this group to define. within those considerations that we've talked about. So if you're like me and you really clear boxes, like this could be a really uncomfortable space. So I want to acknowledge that there are a lot of questions, and some of those questions would be part of this group's work to explore. I'm going to pause because I heard a question. I talked over somebody.
Yeah, I just have a quick question, Sherry. So is it the network council that makes the final approval, or after they approve it, does it have to go back to the Shire or something?
Good question. Yeah, so the recommendations that would come out of this group would go to the council. Once it's approved, they are good to go. The Shire folks have already approved the process that we're going to use, and barring any challenges throughout that process, we will move forward with the council's approval in December. Yeah, so there's no further layer on top of that. That did spark an additional thing I did just want to put into the space as well. This group may get through some parts of this process, and you may hit a stumbling block, or you may have challenges throughout the process that might get in the way of being successful. That's also part of our learning. So the things we want to learn about this process are just as important about what we need to do with this funding. So, you know, I'm just considering all the things. We could get to a point in the planning process where this group might actually feel like, you know what, I don't feel like we can move forward. We're actually not going to be able to do this in the way that it needs to be done. And that's okay. I think engaging myself and maybe even the council in problem solving at some point before we get to a stopping point would be great. But we want to learn through those challenges and barriers too. So there's no kind of pass or fail with this. It's really about what can we do to design a process, something new and different, and how do we put that in place, and what can we learn? And sometimes we learn by things going really, really well, and sometimes we learn by things not going so well. So I'm going to pause because I just said a lot of things. Questions about the opportunity or the process?
I have another question. So is the money coming from the state of Michigan through the public health part
So
of DHHS?
that's a really good question. I don't believe so. I think I will follow up so that I have the actual funding source very clear, but I don't think so. I believe it's passed through some centers for Medicaid and Medicare. It's some continuation of the SIM type related projects. So let me check on that, Harry, and I'll make sure that it gets sent out in the follow-up.
I have another question. So I think they mentioned 4 affinity groups. So is this money divided 4 ways, or is it just free for all for all the different affinity groups, or how does it divide out to the different affinity groups?
Good question. Yeah, so the council actually honed in on this affinity group as the one best positioned to really do work around those COVID-related inequities. Because of the framing around inequitable policies and practices as our root cause here, it was felt that this group was the best place to focus those efforts.
Great.
Yeah.
I just want to jump in on that too. So the other 2 affinity groups, one is about building trust in the community, and the other is about navigating service systems. So more often they're welcome to kind of join this process. As we've mentioned, you can be part of different affinity groups or multiple affinity groups. And very often the root causes overlap. So if someone is working on navigating service systems and they're looking at policies or practices within their organization that can be changed, that would also, they'd also be eligible. So it's not specific to one or another because of, there's so many that overlap. So there might be an opportunity for folks that are engaging in other affinity groups to also participate in this.
Other question. So in order to do an assessment of what's needed and to talk to people, that's not part of the grant? That's just all the precursor work that is funded by the organization?
Yeah, so we're assuming that there's efforts already underway
Yeah.
in the community that are focused on addressing COVID-related inequities. We're assuming, based on our work with partners, that work's kind of already underway. And so what this effort allows us to do is help work with those partners through this affinity group to document that work in an action plan that then becomes, then we're able to coordinate that. Not coordinate's the wrong term maybe.
Yeah.
We're able to
Track
align
it.
those organizational efforts with a shared goal and track outcomes and impact a little better. So it's helping to kind of galvanize our affinity group work in ways that produce outcomes and become more measurable. Yeah.
I have a question, Sherry. So of course we know exactly the total amount of money that we have, and this might have already been answered right in here. Do we decide how much we're going to give each organization that we're helping, or do one organization get all of the money? How does that work?
All of the above. So yes, I think the affinity group, this affinity group, will actually determine within that process, what is the process, and then those funding allocations, those recommendations would be made by this group. Yeah, completely open to what we're hoping, I guess, let me double back, is that this group, through driving that action planning process to get that work documented and connected with those shared goals, that the group that's supporting the design process will actually be able to take a look at all of those strategies and those action plans and be able to kind of not pick and choose is not the right word, but it's all I can come up with right now. But we'll put together a portfolio of strategies that really are going to produce outcomes that help drive the change we're trying to achieve. So that could be a single strategy, it could be multiple strategies. But yeah, that is up to the team to decide.
And I'm pretty sure it's. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Marcus.
And around the parameter of 9 months
Yes.
from beginning to end. Sorry.
That is a very good point. Yeah, you need to also consider what's actually possible within this time frame. Yep.
Right, because this is a little harder than it seems. It's like, yeah, we got all this money, but say we got 3 groups and we give them $20,000 a piece. I'm pretty sure this money is like, if you don't use it, you lose it. We can't just say, all right, we got 10 more thousand, let's just give it to somebody. We will have to figure that all out or make sure that we use it appropriately.
Yes.
And we got a month to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
2 months.
Yep. And I want to acknowledge too that there will be folks sitting at the table as part of the design process, that are putting forth strategies to be considered. And so it's a new territory for us, for many of us, to actually be a part of designing and in making recommendations that ultimately, everyone involved in this process in a traditional sense would have a conflict of interest, correct? But we're not really approaching it that way, because the people best suited to design and implement solutions that can be supported with this funding are the people doing the work. And so, that's part of what we're trying to test. And I know the foundation has done some work in some similar ways. So, I'm glad Dana's here, and hopefully we can continue to pick their brains about what they've learned as well. So, to kind of go back, yes, we've got 3 months-ish. So no, really 2 months, to really do a lot of work. So I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is we're not going to let perfect get in the way of progress. We will not, I just want to say that out loud, like we collectively, all of us that are involved in this effort, we won't get it perfect. We might not even get it right, but we're going to go through a process that is going to help us learn, and we're going to get as close to having, again, perfect is not the right word. We're going to do the best we can with the time we have available, the resources we have at our disposal, and we're going to use all the tools in our toolbox to produce the best outcome that we can. And really, if we ground this in focusing on having as much voice as possible in the process, wherever we end up is going to be the right place. So I just want to throw that out there because I am someone that likes to have things very outlined and defined, and moving fast without a lot of direction or constraints sometimes feels uncomfortable for me. So others probably feel that way too.
Sherry, I also think it's very cool. And you know what, it's a great opportunity. It's sharing the power. It's like you said, it's not every day that we're in a position where we get to decide how to spend money that will benefit our community. So what a cool thing.
Thank you, Dana.
Mhm.
So let's go to the next slide and then I'll pause. This next one is just really meant to break down like what are the roles and responsibilities of the various people that are involved and where they show up. So the first one, the first column there is really this reflects at the end of the process and people are funded and work is happening. So this is just really where will the work fall and who's responsible for what. So any partners with funded strategies will be required to maintain a current action plan. So that's one of the tickets to entry. Tracking and reporting progress on those strategies will also be important. And we assume that that will probably be like a quarterly type thing. It should not be very significant or a barrier of any kind. And then really maintaining engagement in this affinity group would be a really excellent thing for partners to be required to do as well. That piece is kind of, you know, what does that look like is kind of up to this group to define as part of your process. But because we're trying to learn alongside implementation, this is the place where that learning shows up. The affinity group, so this group as a collective body is focusing on developing and implementing that process that's going to align that funding with the strategies. And then also developing those recommendations. Eventually, come December 21st, a member of this group, someone other than a member of our staff team, would want to represent the group by providing those recommendations to the council in December. And then really supporting that implementation and assisting with problem solving and just really being that kind of implementation support for those partners that you've decided need to be implementing or need the support to implement their strategies. So that's a role the affinity group would have. Amy and Sarah and also myself if needed or as needed, really just providing support for this group's planning. And then also coaching and technical assistance for anyone that's thinking about defining their action plan strategies so that they might be considered if they have strategies that they feel align with this opportunity. So there's that support that's available, you know, in this group and also outside of this group. And then they'll also be helping partners track and report progress. So you'll be on your own. You won't have to kind of go your way on that. Staff can help with that. And then our council, of course, will provide final approval of those recommendations. And then they're going to be kind of high level oversight. So some of the folks on this call serve on the council, but we have about a 30-person group representative of lots of different organizations and sectors. And they're really just going to provide oversight. And so likely we're looking at probably a quarterly update to that group. They may have questions and want some input in between that to see how it's going, but really high level oversight. And then one of their roles they play for our network is to help remove barriers. So if anytime during the planning or the implementation of the project, we hit a wall or partners are running into stumbling blocks, that council would assist as possible. Not always able to alleviate the barriers, but they would be available to assist with that. So, I don't know about others, but like deep breath, whew, thoughts, feedback, comments, more questions? right. Well, how about, I know Amy and Sarah have some kind of next step slides to help us think about, okay, well, what do we do now? So let's maybe jump into those. And if more questions come up, we can circle back.
Okay, so I know that Sherry went through a little bit of the timeline, but we kind of wanted to call out a couple of meeting dates. So typically this affinity group would meet monthly. Clearly that's not going to be sufficient for all of the fun that we're about to encounter on. So we're thinking, and again, we're hoping to get input from this group if that needs to happen. But a couple of weeks from now, maybe the 11th, we'll look at beginning the designing the process. So we would like to come back together in 2 weeks to really look at what does that process look like? How are we going to vote on strategies? How are we going to decide on what makes sense? All of those kind of fun things. And then by the 18th, we're really hoping to have that process finalized. So we really know that these are the parameters around what strategies or set of strategies will be chosen. And then by the December 1st, not likely an actual meeting at that point, but we would need anyone that's looking to apply for the funding to have their action plans completed. And again, Sarah and I are open to helping folks work through that process. It's not a very difficult process, but we can always kind of partner with you to make sure that the strategies are system change aligned and that there's strong strategies, things like that. And then if you're like, okay, this is a strategy, I'd like help with how this might be implemented, we can assist with all of that in moving forward. So the 18th, the 11th and 18th would likely be meetings. By the 1st, action plans will have been completed. And then that first week or two in December, we would look to identify strategies and partner action plans. There may likely be a meeting in that time frame. Again, it would depend on this group's availability and what this group thinks. This is just a proposed timeline. And then we would meet again on the 16th of December to finalize those recommendations that we'll then ultimately bring to council. And as Sherry mentioned, one of the members from this group would on the 21st bring those recommendations to council. So fast and furious, lots to think about. There may be meetings that pop up intermittently with this group, but we're looking at for sure the 11th, 18th, probably another one in that first 2 weeks of December, and then the 16th, we would look to finalize those recommendations we'd make to the council. Any questions on that timeline? All right.
I was just going to add something that you probably can see it, but I'm very visual. So in my mind, I'm seeing like two parallel tracks, right? We've got this group that's really focused on designing that process that we need to get ready to recommend or to implement. And then alongside that, organizations and partners that are engaged in work around COVID-related inequities can be working on action plans. That won't necessarily always show up in this group space while you're working to design this process. So just know that those supports are available. You don't have to do that action planning on your own, but it may not, like it won't all fit in the design process. Support for organizations and individuals that are working on action plans are likely happening alongside. And you don't have to wait until close to December to start working on that. We've got action plans live today, and organizations have access to the template. I know Amy and Sarah have lots of tools they can share. So.
Yeah, I think and that is on the next slide a little bit, that we talked about things that we can help with. Do you want to go there, Amy? Or maybe it's the next one, doesn't matter, whatever. Next steps, and just to also, like, it's a lot of information in a short amount of time, and it's hard, I think, to like sometimes to hear all of the requirements of a thing, right? Like, this is the funding and these are the requirements, and also, like Sherry said, this is going to be a new way that we're doing things. So when Amy put up the timeline too, like deciding a process, like partners are doing this, the people that are in the group. So Amy and I are not deciding a thing, just to clarify, like we are the facilitators and how we can support and all of these things, but it really is who is there and making sure that we have the right people there, like representative of our community and diverse perspectives from all parts of our community, especially the places that are closest to the inequities. That is how it will be decided. And so just want to make that clear, like it is very fast. And as Marcus was talking about, oh my gosh, we have to spend this money. Like, yeah, and we have to come up with a process. It's a lot of things in a short amount of time. And if we have the right people at the table, it will make all of the difference. So this is included in our next steps is looking to you all for your thoughts on who needs to be included in the group. We know that this, like Sherry said, this opportunity kind of like came up last week, and we're like, oh my gosh, because in an ideal world, right, we have timing and we'll let you know months ahead of time and we can prep you and all of these things, and that is not the world we are currently in. So we are looking to you for help, and we will reach out and do some targeted outreach, but we also don't, I already said this, we don't know the same people. And so we're really counting on you all to know who should be included in this group. If you're doing good work alongside someone, if you know of a grassroots organization that maybe wanted or needs additional funding but hasn't been successful in the past or whatever, we would love to have them. Like their voices should be here too. So that will be one of our next steps is really working hard on that. And then we're also going to be working. Sherry, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, almost like a little challenge for this group of think about who you can invite. Think about who you personally are going to make outreach to, because you want to make sure their voice is present. And again, as Sarah's already said, like community voice is super important in this process. So I just maybe want to issue the challenge to the group of think of at least one person who is not represented here today and maybe hasn't had a voice in things like this in the past. And how can you, as a member of this group that's interested in this project, help them get engaged? So throw that out there.
Thanks. So some other next steps, we're going to have to start thinking about the process around deciding, right? Like we talked already about this around how will this group decide who gets the funding? Is it one strategy that gets all of the funding? Is it 7 strategies that get 10,000? Like whatever is decided, a process has to be developed and this group will decide that. So if you all have great examples of processes that have happened, I already know, and I've already referenced that Dana and the Jackson Community Foundation has done some examples, and Amy was talking about like, oh, I know this place has done similar things, and so it's not helpful to start from scratch when other things have been invented or are great or a great starting point, and that we can edit. So we're going to be thinking of processes, and it would be awesome if you all would be thinking of the same, and we can come together and say like, oh, this doesn't work. Actually, this is a great idea. Oh, that's crap. Don't do that. Like that's what we're going to do together. And we've talked a million. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to jump in on that one. We also have like our community engagement group that was served in the network the past few years has a toolkit too. And they've researched some national groups that have really had community voice leading disbursements of funding. And some of those are outlined in our community engagement toolkit, where like Cleveland Up had a project where the community voice is really the determiners of funding and things like that. So we will send some of those resources to you. A lot of them are on our website, but that's kind of what we're thinking of in different national programs where community voices led decision making.
And that leads right into the last bullet too. Like, how can we make sure that this is reflective of the community voice? And the group, right, will determine to make sure that the community voice is heard in the process. And that is centered in all of our work, and it will be centered and at the top of the process and how the funding should be awarded. So just to clarify, and Sherry mentioned it as well, and actually I've been chatting with people in the messages as well, is that Amy and I one of our roles is to help partners with the action planning process. So we didn't get into it very much today, but we have held action planning workshops in the past, and we've held countless one-on-one action planning meetings, which I think are very beneficial because we get to learn about the work you're doing, and we ask questions of like, well, why are you doing that strategy? Like, why did you decide that? Oh, that's interesting. What data have you collected, right? It's a curious and also helps bring up things that maybe you haven't thought of. And not every strategy has to be 1,000,000% fleshed out, but specifically with this funding opportunity, an action plan will have to be created. So if you're like, oh my gosh, it's too much, I can't, I'm overwhelmed, like that is where Amy and I can step in, and we are happy to help individually or whatever makes sense and like Sherry said, there will not be a meeting, like one of these meetings we meet together will not be, okay, everyone get out your computer, let's do it together. It will have to be something that you're working on either by yourself or with our help, and that we can move forward so that by the time we meet and continue to meet, the action planning is happening. Did I miss anything there?
Nope.
I was just going to add that, yeah, I think, to your point, Sarah, like the goal being that work around action planning is happening, and that by December 1st, this group actually has a pretty robust group of strategies to look across and then implement your process. Yeah.
Is there any questions on we're getting ready to close. Is there any questions on, really, you can have, even if you think of a question later or don't want to pipe up now because you're not sure how it might sound, please reach out to any of us and we'll be happy to answer or direct or any of it.
For sure, we're available. I also want to mention that center website, the jacksoncollaborative.network.org. That is where you can find the toolkit that I mentioned earlier, and it is also under partner resources where you can look at action planning. So if you're like, okay, I know what I want to do, feel free to jump right in. jacksoncollaborative.network.org. Along the top, you'll see partner resources. You can do a partner profile there, and you can also take a look at the action plan so that you can kind of see the questions that you'll need to be thinking about when developing those strategies.
Dana, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I have two questions, and these questions are probably just coming from me because I work for a funder. And so I just have, one's a question, one's just something for you to think about. So I know you're not calling this a grant round, but is there a requirement that there is evidence that this inequity, like linking it back to COVID-19's effect on this inequity, like because this money was designed to address an inequity that was maybe shown to be worse or whatever due to COVID-19. Mm-hmm. So do these strategies need to show that link back to that?
Yeah, so I think yes, but the actual how is up to this team to decide. So it needs to be, strategies need to be focused on addressing a COVID-related inequity. And we know that if we're focused on root cause level change, that we're likely looking at policies and practices and things like that. But the extent to which this group needs to define that, that's really up to this group. So okay. I think, keeping it broad at the requirement level, and then allowing you guys to really have the flexibility and to innovate and be a little open. Yeah.
And then my other question is, so when we've awarded grants to organize, like you might have a coalition of some sort that gets funded or something that's not an existing entity, like a 501c3 nonprofit organization. I don't know what the restrictions are on your money and who you can write checks to. Mm-hmm. When we award grants like that, we have restrictions. So that might be something that you'll want to know on your end. are the restrictions about who you can write checks to? And if so, are fiduciaries needed if there's a coalition or a grassroots group or something that isn't a formal entity for them to be able to accept a check, and you would be able to write one. So
I think that
it's a
would be
little technical thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have enough diversity within the types of organizations that are involved within our network council that I feel like we'll be able to problem solve through those things. And I think we would take them on a case by case basis, but it would be helpful. And that's a good point, Dana, like maybe as you guys are working through your process, by the time those recommendations are put forth to the council, some of those details might be helpful, not from a decision-making standpoint, like whether or not it's a coalition or a 501c3 shouldn't factor into the decision-making, but it would help the council know where they might have to step into to help problem solve, to be able to facilitate the funds, to be able to get to the organization or the entity that you funded. It's a good point. I'm going to put my email, many of you have it, but I'm going to put my email in the chat. And I know Amy and Sarah will include it when they send stuff out. But if you have questions about any of the information that I've provided about the funding opportunity, the what we know and what we know about how we'll do it so far, feel free to reach out to me. If you have questions about the affinity group and those types of things, I am not the expert. Amy and Sarah would be the ones to go to for that. But I am definitely available if you need to talk more about the information that you've heard. I know Amy and Sarah are going to send some follow-up stuff, which will include these slides. So you'll have the information I presented in your inbox to refer to if you need to. I'm not sure how we're closing today, but I just did want to go back and revisit the fact that the next time this group meets, I won't be with you because I really don't want to, I don't want to have any real or perceived influence on the process. I really need to step back and not be confusing things in that way. So, but I do want to leave you with a challenge of between now and the next time this group meets, we need to have more voices from the community, from the different sectors that are involved in our system. That would be something that I would feel is like top of the list for this group is how do we actually broaden the reach of this group and have more voices at the table the next time we meet, because that's actually when the design, we're going to roll up, you guys are going to roll up your sleeves and get started. So
on that note, I think in one of the slides I proposed a meeting in 2 weeks, which would be the 11th of November. Hopefully we'll have a very robust group in between that here and then. So yeah, continue the challenge of reaching out, inviting people, making sure we have community voice, and be thinking about how the process might work. And we will, as Sherry mentioned, Sarah and I will be sending out information as we wrap this meeting with some of the meeting slides, some of the links to different resources as far as the action planning and network things. But feel free to reach out to us prior to that. Hopefully in the next day or two, you will get an email from us and plan on the 11th, unless anyone sees any big issues with that date. Again, we are, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, just to let you know, I will be out of the office on the 11th for Veterans Day.
Okay.
Are you going to be recording that meeting as well so that I can double back and check it out, when I get back into the office on the 12th?
you know what,
Yeah.
Amy, I'm assuming Veterans Day probably affects many of our
It
folks.
probably
We
does.
might need to revisit that day.
We will revisit that day and we will send out an alternate to that day. I was just kind of like, what, as Sherry mentioned, we just got this like this week. So I'm like, okay, we need to meet in 2 weeks. So we will look at those dates and come up with a date, but likely within the next 2 weeks, we'll look to reconvene as a group so that we can kind of start moving along.
If it ends up being the 11th, that's fine. I talked to Debbie already. She is available to represent the organization for that day. So if worst comes to, she can, definitely loop me in. And as long as they're recording it and you're going to send out the link to the recording for the meeting, then we should be okay. So if the 11th is good for everybody, don't upset that because of me. I just wanted to let you know that I wouldn't be in that day.
Okay, I appreciate it, Ryan.
Thank you for bringing that up. So when we looked at calendars, that we weren't looking at one that had actual details on it. So good point. Yes.
So yeah, there will be a lot of, we'll send you things, and we'll send you summaries, and we'll send you how to get a hold of us and the slides, and the recording will be up, and you can send the recording on to other people. If they're like, what did I hear? I heard a rumor. Is it true? We can confirm the rumor via recording and slides and all sorts of things. So this is just like step one. And then we have like 27 steps to do between now and December 21st, but we got it. Is there any questions before we leave you all? I know this is a unique version of the Affinity Group, and it will be unique for a little bit of time. Harry got a chair squeak. Got anything else, Harry?
Yeah, well, I kind of do. I was thinking about some of this. I'm kind of ahead on what we could be doing. And when we did strategic doing, remember that, Sherry? We had one group that came up with this strategy to train people across the whole of Jackson County on how to, like, I can't remember the name of the training, but it was like basically how people could treat people better when they're like in positions of, oh, like at the bank or at the school or anything. So it kind of went forward, and the strategy was to train the community. And I think we trained over 2,200 people or something like that, just from this one idea from one strategic doing group. And so can the outcome be a training across the whole sector, or is it going to just be small groups that do great things?
A really good question. So training was one of the things that they really clearly defined as capacity building that would not align with this funding strategy or with this funding opportunities. So
even if you're training people, like, so say like one of the outcomes is the mental health concerns are really low, and you wanted to help people with mental health first aid or whatever the training would be. Can you train actual community members as a part of that really isn't, that's like providing a service, isn't it?
I think if it's tied to, so for example, like if we were to say, hey, let's host a training and we're going to launch this new thing in Jackson. Anything that's really focused on the training that doesn't really have legs from there would not be considered a viable strategy that I would encourage the group to spend time on. I think if it's tied to shifting a policy or practice, like there is actually action tied to it beyond the training, and there would be some action and accountability if there's a piece that is needed in order to implement the solution potentially. But I would just say that's kind of a gray area that might cause challenges down the road if it was too heavily training focused.
Okay.
Because we have lots of resources for training.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So think about, how does this connect directly with the action that we know needs to happen? And like Dana said, like, this is exciting. We don't usually get money like this.
No.
We're not thinking about starting up a program or starting up a service. Like, we're digging into what we know is broken. Let's fix it. And so it's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
Sherry,
Thank you.
Sherry, can council members participate in this process?
Absolutely.
And then at the point that it was going to be voted on or whatever happens at the council level, they would just need to abstain?
Yes, we would leave that within the conflict of interest. Our folks self-manage that by stepping back when needed. So that's a good point, and I'll make sure to make note of that, Dana, because that'll be good when we get to December.
Dana, I also want to mention, I don't think that we're looking to bring all strategies to the council. I think this group really has to kind of so we might get 30. This group might recommend 7 or 1 or whatever it might be. But this group will really be the deciders unless the council sees a red flag or something that's really not aligned with the funding opportunity. This group will primarily, I mean, there might be some questions or concerns from the council, but we're not bringing all 30 to the council for them to say which one. We're actually bringing the ones that this group decides is most appropriate to fund, and then they will give final approval.
I was actually just more interested if the council members can participate,
yeah.
because they all came from networks where they had input on strategies and things. So I just
Yep.
wanted to make sure they could still participate at this level.
And I think the other side of that question, folks don't have to be actively engaged in a network group right now to be able to join this process and be able to have a voice into the design and potentially, you know, get involved so that they can be a part of the process. So that's also just another layer of that. I would leave, and I know we covered it before, but I think the two main things for me is want to make sure that this group understands what we're presenting to the council in December is evidence of a process that aligns with the things that we talked about earlier. Presence of community voice, that the strategies that you're aligning funding with and making those recommendations around have evidence that they've been built alongside community members who are experiencing those problems. So the process is part of the product on this. So just keep that in mind as you guys are designing, keeping your eye on what steps are we taking? How did we do that? That's going to be part of that recommendation, because evidence of a strong process is going to lead the recommendations. And if we're hitting all the marks on the process, wherever we end up in the actual funding recommendations is the right place. So.
All right.
Any other final thoughts, questions, concerns? All right. We will wrap things up. Look forward to connecting with you moving forward, and reach out to Sarah or Sherry or myself at any point with any questions. And we will move on from here. I appreciate you guys taking the time to join us this morning and take the
Thanks
challenge.
all.
Bring someone next. Thanks
you,
all.
everybody.
All
Thank
right,
you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.